When I started researching this and editing this, I had no idea that it was going to be so long, but it's upwards of an hour so far, so I'm going to have to release it in 2 parts. So the first part is going to be from the first incident all the way up to when the last girl disappears. And then the second part is going to be from when the last girl disappears to the end of the timeline. Let's all pretend for a minute that we're women in our 30s. Guys, just bear with us for a second, okay? We're women in our mid-30s and we're out with our boyfriends at our favorite bar. It's just a regular night. We got friends there. There are familiar faces all around. People are laughing, music's playing, people are dancing, and you're just tossing some drinks back, trying to relax and forget about life for a second. But inevitably, it happens. Maybe you've had too much to drink. Maybe he's had too much to drink. Somebody's had too much to drink, and a fight breaks out. Not a fisticuffs physical thing, but a verbal altercation between the two of you, during which he gets so upset with you that he demands that you leave the bar. Not really wanting things to escalate into something more serious, you do. You leave the bar, you walk out of the door and out of the lives of everyone there forever. That is exactly what happened to Nancy Paiva, July 7th, 1988, when her and her on-again, off-again boyfriend, Frankie Pina, were at their beloved bar, Whispers. Now, Whispers was located in Weld Square of New Bedford, Massachusetts. And to say that it had a terrible reputation would be a drastic understatement. Whispers in the Weld Square area were very well known for 3 things. They were hookers, cocaine, and heroin. And it's estimated that the bar alone brought in $5.2 million every year just with its illegal drug sales. So as you can imagine, with the money and the drugs and the sex, the crime was inevitably going to follow. And so the cycle begins. But it didn't start that night with Nancy, and it didn't end that night with Nancy. From April to roughly October of 1988, there was a string of vanishing women from the New Bedford area. Some of them prostitutes, all of them drug addicts and regulars at Whispers Pub. But it was more than this that would connect these women. These women would all be entangled in a black, chaotic web of ex-boyfriends, bad decisions, and even worse habits. Hey weirdos! Welcome back, and if you're new to my station, thanks for stopping by. My name is Tracy, I am the Bone Knacker, and today we're going to be talking about the New Bedford Highway murders. I want to mention real quick that while I'm aware that the book Shallow Graves exists, I intentionally made the decision to not read it until after I was done with this video. I wanted to go through the investigatory process on my own. I wanted to find the information that I could find and make the timeline that I could make based on that information. I didn't want the video to be based on somebody else's, albeit incredibly thorough, already published research. So, with that in mind, grab your jackets, put on your outside feet, because we're off like a herd of turtles to New Bedford, Massachusetts, April 8th, 1988. April 8th, 1988 was the day that a woman named Rochelle came rushing into the police station looking for a man named Ken Pond. Why? Well, other than being former lovers, Rochelle needed to hire him because he was a lawyer and she had just been assaulted. Rochelle was a 28-year-old regular down at Whispers, not because she was a prostitute, but because she was a raging drug addict, and Whispers is where she went shopping. And according to her, she was out with a man named Roger Swire when he attacked and then tried to rape her. At some point, after bringing all of this to the attention of Ken, the two of them got together and collectively decided that it would be a really good idea to go together and then confront Mr. Swire. Unfortunately, Kenny Boy brought a gun. Now, as you could imagine, this sort of leaves Rochelle in a tender situation. Having already had charges pressed against Roger for an alleged assault, but now bringing her lawyer to confront him and he's pulled out a gun, she's now witness to a felony against her own lawyer. How's that for a conflict of interest? It seems like the cops barely got a chance to wrap their heads around that triangle when they got a call stating that the wife of District Attorney Ronald Pena had been found in the trunk of her own car. Aside from being married to the district attorney, Sheila was a bit of a local celebrity, co-hosting the WJAR Channel 10 News with the less than reputable Matt Lauer. So how did Sheila get into her own truck? Well, according to her, she was driving her rented Monte Carlo down 195 when it started acting up, so she had to pull over. It's unknown if this guy was following her or if she pulled over near an already pulled over vehicle or if he sprung out of the woods, but shortly after she pulled over, she was attacked and then assaulted. After the assault, with a knife to her throat, she says she was then forced to drive about the 20 minutes to a little secluded area outside of New Bedford, Massachusetts, where she was then made to get out of her car and into her trunk. And it was there that she stayed for about 18 hours, kicking and screaming until a passerby finally heard her and called the cops to come let her out. I do want to take this time to briefly mention that Sheila did have a pretty open battle with alcohol abuse. She was sort of a raging alcoholic and known for bouts of bizarre and unusual behavior. She was never classified as a drug addict, but she was a drug user, and it was kind of common for her to just disappear randomly for days at a time. It's kind of like maybe being stuffed in the trunk of her own car wasn't the weirdest thing to ever happen to her. Regardless, neither her nor Pena would really elaborate on her attack, her attacker, or the condition she was in when she was pulled from her trunk.
The arsonist had oddly shaped feet.
It was, however, mentioned that the keys were still in the ignition, and this led investigators to believe that the attacker was at least familiar with the area, or familiar enough to be able to confidently flee on foot.
The felon confidently fled on foot.
If we back up for a minute and consider the fact that she was attacked 20 minutes away from where she was left, and the attacker knew not only that this second location existed, but how to quickly, conveniently, and confidently get there, that tells me that maybe he's a little bit more than familiar with the area and that maybe he's from the area. I do believe it's also important to mention that nothing suspicious was reported. No one suspicious was seen in the area. Maybe this guy was local, so it wasn't weird to see him around.
So about 10 days after we pull Sheila from her trunk, a very worried mother calls the police station because her daughter, Robin Rhodes, can't be found. Now, Robin was not a prostitute, but like the other girls, was a drug addict and also chose to get her drugs at Whispers. She was also another ex-girlfriend of Kenneth Pond. Does anyone else see the red flags here?
There's a pattern emerging. It's coming. I see it.
Robin's mother reported her missing around the 24th of April, 1988.
Now we are barreling headfirst to the end of April, and May is quickly nipping at our heels. And if you recall from earlier, there was a woman named Rochelle who now had some court dates coming up. The cops were getting worried because she had come up missing. She's nowhere to be found. Couldn't find out if this court date was for her alleged assault with Roger Swire or if it was for Ken pulling out the gun. But regardless of which case it was, she was a key component and needed to be there. Because of her lifestyle, because she was so frequently seen at Whispers, she had formed relationships. She had friends there, including Nancy and Frankie. And even they had discussed that they were worried because they hadn't seen her. In fact, it sort of seemed like everybody was worried about where she was, except for Ken. Rochelle was officially reported missing April 27th, 1988 by Frankie, not her lawyer. Right after Rochelle was officially reported missing, another girl was reported missing, and her name was Deborah McConnell. She was last seen in Newport, right outside of New Bedford, actually attending her own mother's funeral. She was last seen by her father as she was leaving. But before another breath could even be taken, so wasn't another girl. This young lady's name was Deborah Medeiros, and she was last seen around the 25th of May when she told her mother Olivia that she was going to be leaving to New Bedford for a few days to spend some time with her boyfriend. Now, unfortunately, shortly after arriving to her boyfriend's house, they got in a fight and she turned around and left again. Assuming she was just going back to her mother's house, her boyfriend didn't seem too concerned and didn't really chase after her.
It wasn't until several days later, around the 27th, when he still hadn't heard anything from her, that he started to get worried. And he actually called her mother to see if she was okay or if she had made it back. It was at that point when they learned that she was missing. Olivia hadn't seen her since the 25th. May 27th, Deborah was officially reported missing. While all of this was going on, another girl would actually go missing, and her name was Christine. She was only 19 years old and the daughter of a former sheriff, although he had died several years before this incident. Christina, a lot like the other girls, was not known to be a prostitute, but she had a pretty severe drug addict. And despite her age, she led a fairly transient lifestyle. So it wasn't uncommon at all for her family to just not hear from her. And as a result of that, it's unsure exactly when she went missing, but she was last seen around the end of May. Right after Christina went missing, her neighbor Marilyn also went missing. Now, Marilyn was from a very supportive family. Her mother was loved by the community. Her father also was a cop, but he retired in 1981. She wasn't a sex worker, but she did have a very active struggle with drug addiction. Marilyn was actually last seen by her family sometime in April or May when she told them that she was going to go out west to spend some time with some relatives that they had out there. Hoping that while she was out there, she might sober up and start to get her life together, they were pretty on board and supportive of this plan. It wasn't until many months later in June that they realized there was a problem. Marilyn's parents contacted these relatives to check up on their daughter, at which point they learned that not only did she never arrive, but she had never spoken to them. No plans had ever been made for her to go out there in the first place. So where was she? So now it's summer, July is here, and it's the 4th of July weekend, specifically July 3rd. And not only is it busy with people, but it's already marked to be the hottest summer on record. People were really traveling, going back and forth to the beach, really kind of exploiting this 4th of July weekend. And such was the case for this poor woman who was traveling northbound on 140 when she had to pee. Always go pee before you leave home. So doing like a lot of us might do, she put on her blinker and pulled over to the side of the road, popped out and into the tree line to find herself some privacy to relieve herself. Except she didn't find privacy, she found the remains of Deborah Medeiros. Because of the state her remains were in, she could not be identified right away. Due to the hot summer, her remains decomposed a lot quicker than they may have normally, which led investigators to believe that the body had maybe been sitting there longer than it actually had been. The reason that this is significant is because they thought that the bodies had been there longer than they had been. They were looking at older missing persons cases instead of more recent ones. This is a small part of the reason why it took a little longer to ID some of the bodies. Deborah was found nude, lying on her back with her feet facing towards the highway. She had a bra wrapped around her neck, which led investigators to believe that she was strangled. To my knowledge, there was no evidence of body damage, there was no cut marks or anything like that evident on her bones, and there were no bullet or bullet casings anywhere near her body. The 4th, 5th, and 6th of July seem to, thank God, pass without incident. But if you think the 7th was gonna go by, you are sorely mistaken. You remember Nancy from the very beginning? It's her turn now. Despite Nancy's current situation, she actually had a pretty good upbringing and had a lot going for her. Came from a fairly good family. She graduated high school and went on to secretarial school. She shortly dropped out, and at the age of 19 she got married and had her first daughter. Shortly after that she got divorced, but then had another daughter. Nancy didn't have a huge history with prostitution, but she was a drug addict and she did get her drugs at Whispers. She also had made some friendships there. She was friends with Rochelle and Frankie, and some articles even stated that they were all roommates at one time. Oh yeah, plus, because in her past, having gone to secretarial school, she worked with Pond. Nancy was last seen by her sister Judy's friend walking towards home beneath a road sign with tears in her eyes. So like we had talked about earlier, Nancy went missing on the 7th when she was told to leave Whispers after her and her boyfriend Frankie got in a fight. There's also conflicting information about the time that she actually went missing. A lot of things say that she just, in general, went missing like in the wee hours of the morning. But this interview that I watched with Judy specifically said that she was seen walking towards home at 7 p.m. It was July 9th when a cop looked up from his desk and onto a very familiar face. It was Frankie Pena's face. After being missing for 2 full days, Frankie Pena, despite his terrible reputation, despite probably having a zillion warrants out for him, despite already having reported Rochelle missing just a few weeks ago, walked into the police station to now report Nancy missing too. For any of you out there keeping track, that's 6 missing people and 1 dead body found in just as many weeks, with 3 of them having romantic ties to Mr. Pond. I don't know about you, but I think it's time we take a minute and talk about Ken. Bet you I could do an entire 40-minute episode just on the shady actions of Kenneth Pond. Ken Pond slithered into existence December 6, 1949. Born, bred, and raised in New Bedford, Massachusetts, as soon as his sticky, slimy feet hit the ground, his crime career took off. Kenny Boy was most known for his love of heroin and cocaine, as well as his love for taking stuff that just didn't belong to him, landing his first conviction in 1968 at the tender age of just 19 years old. But this was not the end of his crime spree. Kenny Boy, he picked that ball up and he fucking ran with it, getting himself 10 convictions between 1968 and 1971. That is a conviction every 4 months, and that is absolutely insane. Eventually, I think around July of 1975, Ken was convicted of a crime and put in jail, and then 5 months later, not only was he pardoned, but the conviction was reversed. We'll talk more about that in a second, but after being released from jail with his squeaky clean record and his second chance to live life and not be a shitbag, he actually did. He took it. He sobered up, he buckled down, and he decided to get his law degree, earning his undergraduate in 1978 from NHU. He then went on to Suffolk University Law School to get his law degree in 1983, where he was also added to the Massachusetts bar. He shortly followed that up in 1984 by also being added to the New Hampshire bar. Unfortunately for Ken, though, old habits die real hard, and as the money started coming in and he had a regular income, he fell back into old habits and started to have the regular supply of heroin, cocaine, and women again. But this time Kenny Boy was going to be smart about his illegal indulgences. What he did was he had these Weld Square women, these Rochelles, these Nancys, these Deborahs, go to Whispers, buy his drugs for him, and then bring his drugs to him at his house. It was here where the rumors started to fly. These women started talking amongst themselves about Pond's increasingly paranoid behavior. When they would bring these drugs to him, he would usher them inside the house and then shut and bolt the doors. Red flag. Holding these women against their will for like hours at a time, and sometimes the entire day. Suspicious? No, everyone does this. He would do things like shut the blinds, lock the windows, totally paranoid behavior. It was also said that in his house, they had seen adult videos, snuff, in which the women in it appeared to be unalive while being hugged around the neck. Has anyone out there been keeping a red flag count? Because I am genuinely interested and invested at this point. When the women were asked why they never reported this intimidating behavior, they simply replied by saying that Ken never actually tried to assault them. He never tried to sleep with them. And while they were there, he offered them drugs. So being drug addicts, they were willing to put aside being uncomfortable. They were willing to put aside his bizarre behavior for the free access to the drugs. Now this pretty much brings us up to where we started in the beginning, up to 1988. So let's go back and talk about that 1975 conviction. Before we get into that though, I just so there's crystal clear clarification, I want to quickly discuss what it means to be convicted of a crime and the difference between being pardoned and having your conviction reversed. When you are convicted of a crime, you are found beyond a reasonable doubt to have done this act. Just like you are innocent until you're proven guilty, to be convicted of a crime, you have in fact been proven guilty. So for example, all these crimes that Ken committed between 1968 and 1971, he was found beyond a reasonable doubt to be guilty of, and so then convicted. When you're pardoned from a crime, it's still on your record. You were still found guilty. You still are guilty. It's not, but I would, for lack of phrasing, compare it to like a parole. You're released, but there are conditions. Double jeopardy would apply to this because you are still found guilty. It's still on your record. When you are pardoned and then your conviction is reversed, it's wiped off of your record. It's like a step above or 5 steps above a deferred disposition. It's not on your record at all. You can't look it up. If for whatever reason you find yourself in court again, they cannot bring up this previous conviction because on paper it didn't happen. However, if your conviction has been reversed, double jeopardy does not apply, and if new evidence is found, you can be retried. So I hear you asking, why is this a big deal? Why do you need to know this? Because when Francis Sargent pardoned and then reversed the conviction for this 1975 crime, he did it to every crime he was convicted of from 1968 up until that point, 1975. Kenneth was literally being released from jail with the squeaky clean record of a newborn baby. That's not even the insane part. Because the conviction was reversed, it was really hard for me to find information about exactly what he was convicted of. Most information just really casually says narcotics and theft, but then it kind of detours you to the New Bedford murder situation. But the other day, after researching this for 5 weeks, this popped up at 1:30 in the morning. According to Governor Francis Sargent, Pont was injustably convicted of a crime that he did not commit, first-degree murder. And it was later stated that it was a different juvenile that must have fled the scene before the authorities arrived. Why is this coming up 5 months after a conviction? So here is what I actually found. Governor Sargent goes on to say Kenneth Pont was involved in the Pine Ridge shooting, but he steadfastly denies any involvement in the killings. What's happened here is Kenneth Pont was released and Leonard Pelletier was incarcerated in his place. When I tried to re-enter the information to find these searches, this is what came up. The reason that my photos are going to be so terrible is because for some reason when these things popped up, I grabbed my phone and took pictures of my computer screen. And I'm glad I did too, because I found this stuff at 1:30 in the morning and I was exhausted. So I kept my tabs open, but put the computer away because I wanted to get some rest and dig into this bombshell with fresh eyes. Except when I woke up, the information on the tabs were gone. And then every time I tried to re-enter my search, this is what would happen. Keeping all this new information in mind, let's get back to the New Bedford Highway murders. Okay, so just to recap really quick, because a lot has happened. In April, Rochelle hired Pont and then went missing, and Sheila was pulled from the trunk of her car. In May, Deborah McConnell, Deborah Medeiros, and Christina went missing. In June, Christina's neighbor Marilyn went missing. In July, we found our first body, and on July 9th, Nancy Paiva was reported missing. Shortly after Frankie reported Nancy missing, a woman named Deborah DeMillo went missing.
Now, Deborah was both a prostitute and a drug addict and was frequently at Whispers. She was last seen by her family June 18th, 1988, as she was actually being arrested for prostitution. After spending some time in jail, she was then released to a women's work release program. She was last seen alive July 11th, successfully escaping said work program.
I can already hear you asking me through the screen, why, after reporting 2 of these women missing, living with them both, and dating one of them, why isn't Frankie a suspect? Frankie was a suspect until about July 12th or 13th, when he was arrested on unrelated charges. While he was in jail, several more women went missing.
So now it's July 16th, and a young woman named Mary Rose Santos has gone missing. Now, she was not a prostitute, but she was an active drug user and a bit of a drinker. She had just reconciled with her husband and was a former customer of Kenneth Pont.
That's 4 girls now.
She was last seen by her husband when he dropped her off at a bus station. She was last seen alive about 5 hours after that, dancing at a place called the Quarterback Lounge. Now it's July 30th, and like we talked about, it was the hottest summer on record. So Judy Santos, Nancy's sister, and her family were returning from a day out at a public pool. They were on their way home when Judy, who was a passenger in the car, noticed on the opposite lane a medical examiner's van pulled over on the side of the road. It was July 30th, 1988, when Nancy Paeva's remains were found on the eastbound Reed Road exit of 195 in Dartmouth. Like Deborah, she was nude with her feet facing the highway. Although Nancy did not have a bra around her neck, her death was still ruled a strangulation. The next lady to climb aboard the missing and/or murdered train was a young woman named Sandra. Sandra was a heavy cocaine addict who was frequently at Whispers and also the mother of 2. She was last seen at 11 p.m. on August 11th, walking out of her apartment building and seemingly off the face of the planet. The last of these New Bedford 9 women to go missing was Dawn Mendez, and she had just an absolutely tragic life. She was a prostitute and a drug addict, and on top of that, her boyfriend would regularly beat her if she did not bring him home enough drugs, or if she did not make enough money prostituting to buy him drugs. She was last seen September 4th, 1988. I can't help but wonder if these women died of forced overdoses. Them being drug addicts, they may be eager to take anything, not fully understanding what may be in the needle. And by these women giving themselves their own injections, that would reduce the risk of fingerprints or DNA left on them by someone else.
With their bodies being left out in the elements as long as they were, coupled with how insanely hot it was, there's no way that you would see a needle mark on them. And would it even be weird if they did see one? No, it wouldn't be weird because they're drug addicts. It would have been equally as unsuspicious if it was cocaine that was in their system, if they even tested for that stuff.
Shortly after the last woman went missing in October, Kenneth Pont closed down his law firm and moved to Florida. No more women went missing after that. This is where I'm gonna leave you until next time. This took a lot longer than I thought. I'm going to release it in 2 parts. I'm aware that there are some big names that you were expecting to hear. Margaret, Diane, Anthony. The reason why you haven't heard these names yet is because I'm doing this in chronological order and they just haven't appeared on the timeline yet. But do not fret, they will come forward in the next edition.
You stayed till the end. I really appreciate it. Please consider liking, sharing, subscribing. Any sort of interaction really is a tremendous help in helping our channels to grow. Until next time, I am the Bone Knacker. Be safe, be smart, and be compassionate.